Well, hey guys, we're so excited to have Dr. Jennifer Wiseman with us today. This is cool. We had a chance to interact at a Faith and Science forum over the last year and a half, and me and Anna got a chance to eat some meals with Dr. Wiseman and just get to know her. Dr. Wiseman, you have a long list of all of your titles, but you're primarily a real expert, and you work in the field of astronomy. You're an astronomer, director emeritus of the Dialogue on Science, Ethics, Religion at the American Association for the Advancement of Science. You have other roles, including things with NASA, and you got different things that you do. But I would love to hear how a Southern girl from Mountain Home, Arkansas, ends up in such an influential position looking at space all day and making different discoveries that you've made and that kind of thing.
Well, thank you, Pastor Andrew, if I may call you that. I really appreciate your having me to join you and all of your congregation and people watching and sharing in this today. I truly did grow up in rural Arkansas on a farm, and it is by God's grace that I have been able to pursue a scientific career. But I think it all started with kind of living out in the natural world. In the Ozarks of north central Arkansas, it's quite beautiful. There are lots of hills, but also lakes and rivers and forests. And I just enjoyed being able to wander around and take in the natural world quite easily. And so I love trees and water and wildlife and all kinds of animals. And I also love the night sky. So at that time, the night sky was pretty dark and pretty clear. And so at night, my parents and I would take our dogs and go for walks on good weather days. And I would just look up at the sky and just be fascinated and kind of wished I could blink my eyes and go to that star or that planet, and check it out. Nowadays, unfortunately, in most places, the glow from city lights and street lights has kind of made the night sky harder to see. We call that light pollution, and it is a shame because it's a little harder to have that easy inspiration of looking at the night sky. We can solve that by putting domes on our city lights and things to keep the light going down. But I appreciated my heritage of being in the natural world, and that led to an interest in science. So science is simply a systematic study of nature, and so it was kind of natural for me to enjoy my classes in school of science. And I had really encouraging teachers in the rural public school system that I attended. Just teachers very dedicated, very excited about what they taught, and really encouraging for us to excel in our studies and to reach high, even for maybe an unusual career path. So I'm thankful to the guidance counselors and teachers at my school system as well. And then there's two more factors to it, which is that my family was very encouraging to me. My parents didn't have a chance to go to college, but they made sure that their kids all had a chance to pursue higher education. My oldest brother was really interested in science, and so he saw that I had an aptitude, and so he would give me, sciencey things for Christmas and birthdays and things like that when I was growing up, and I think that really encouraged me just subconsciously that science and curiosity were good things. And then my church family, my family was a Christian family. We belonged to a loving church. We didn't know anything about professional science, and we weren't anywhere near a big city where a university was or anything like that. But we understood that God was responsible for a good creation. And the church was just really encouraging for young people to reach high and explore whatever we wanted to do, knowing that whatever we did, we could do it in a way that honors the Lord. And I think that was all an encouragement to me to eventually study science more seriously in college and beyond.
Well, you just mentioned, God being over a good creation. And I know that just from getting to know you personally, that is one of the more exciting things in your work is that you personally really connect the goodness of God and the beauty that you see and just all the fascinating things that you've been able to experience. We'd love to hear just right now current events. I mean, what are some of the things that are just cool, exciting, personally interesting for you that you're having a chance to work on or observe right now?
Sure. So, space is super cool, right? And we are able to learn more and more about the universe because of our technology, because of telescopes and other things that really are relatively recent in human history. So we now, for the last century, have had tools that no one before ever had a chance to use. So they are revealing things in the deep universe we didn't know before, and they're spurring new questions. So I'll just throw out a few wonderful areas right at the forefront of astronomy these days. One is that, of course, we have discovered that there are lots of galaxies in the universe. You see some of them behind my head here, right? Galaxies are collections of hundreds of billions of stars and all the gas and some of the unseen dark matter between the stars. Now, 100 years ago, when Edwin Hubble was the astronomer, was doing his work, we didn't really know that there were galaxies other than our own Milky Way. We thought that was everything. And yet, these little smudges of light that astronomers were seeing in their telescopes turned out to be other collections of stars a long way away. And of course, now, over the intervening decades, we have discovered that the universe is filled with galaxies. And we are studying more and more about them, how they're different, how they compare, what's going on inside of them, including in our own Milky Way galaxy, which we can't get all the way out of to look back at and take a selfie, but we can look around from the inside and see a little bit about what's going on. We are understanding that the universe is expanding and that expansion is actually getting faster. And so, trying to understand what's causing that is a hot topic in astronomy. And we call this phenomenon dark energy. And then a little closer to home, we're studying all kinds of amazing things in our own Milky Way galaxy and in the neighborhood of our own sun and its planets, what we call our solar system. So we're finding these beautiful, colorful nebulae that are all around the spiral arms of our galaxy and other galaxy. And it turns out there are new stars still forming in these places. So stars are active, and some of them actually run out of fuel eventually and they explode. So we see these supernova explosions, and they actually enrich the surrounding environment with stuff that's been created inside the star. I call them God's factories. The stars are very active, and we're finding out now. This is really exciting. That most stars actually have planets. Now, when I was in school, we didn't know that there were any planets outside of our own solar system, the planets orbiting our sun, because we didn't have the technology. Now we know that planets orbit other stars as well, and they are quite common. And so the race is on now as we try to understand more and more about the characteristics of these planets around other stars and how they are similar and different to the planets in our own solar system. And then finally, in our own solar system, we're finding a lot of neat activity. We're finding out that the weather changes on the outer planets of our solar system over time, like that great red spot on Jupiter. It's actually shrinking and speeding up, and other storms are cropping up. And we're learning things about the moons around planets in our solar system, which are really intriguing. Some of the moons, like Europa, that orbits Jupiter, and Ganymede, they have icy crusts. They're very cold, but their inner cores seem to have a lot of heat, which enables a liquid water ocean to exist under the icy crusts. So that's kind of intriguing. We have a lot to explore, a lot to learn, and I think it's going to be a long time before we say we've exhausted what there is to learn about the universe.
Well, that stuff is so cool. I know we have different people in our congregation that just eat this stuff up and love, um, love the sciences and just the interesting things that you're bringing up. One of the things that we wanted to ask you really specifically is just about the awe of God in creation. We talked about this in our science forum. Sometimes I think Christians can end up they never get to that part of the conversation because they're maybe in arguments about other parts of the conversation. And I think what we want to maybe model here is I think even you and I potentially disagree on some of aging and different things, but we both totally agree on the idea of the awe that we're to have for the Lord. And that shined to me in all of your presentations to us that it should be something that makes us just, just really stand in awe over God and how awesome he is. And I'd love to hear you just talk about that. I mean, what you looking at space all day, every day. I mean, how much in awe of God are you just in what you do, and how much should we be?
We all should be, because no matter what our jobs are, we should take a few moments every day or every night to either look up at the sky, or look online even and see the kind of images like you see behind my head, or look around at insects and dandelions and trees and animals of all kinds, and just take a moment to be amazed at the beauty and the intricacy of how all of God's creation glorifies God and is flourishing when we allow it to in ways that God intended as good. So I think it's up to us to take time to look around. So when I look at images from telescopes, I'm reminded of God's generosity. You know,
Hmm.
our universe, at least the part that's observable, contains at least 200 billion galaxies. That number is hard for us to process. And then each one of those galaxies can contain hundreds of billions of stars. And like these galaxies behind my head here. And if those galaxies are similar to our own Milky Way, that means each galaxy contains hundreds of billions of planets. Most of them are probably not like Earth, but they are all majestic in their own way. So reminding ourselves that God is big and creative and patient. Some of these things that we're observing in space, the activity going on around black holes and other star systems and things, it seems to not be something that's instant, but God is patient, just like God's patient in our own lives. And I think we can see that God is a lover of beauty. That there's beauty in the fact that we recognize it. That's always a topic of conversation. Is there something objective that's called beauty, or how is it that we recognize something and call it beautiful? Maybe it's the colors, maybe it's the symmetry. Whatever it is, God seems to have enabled us to appreciate something called beauty and to recognize it in different ways. The some of my favorite psalms also, of course, as an astronomer, are Psalm 8 and Psalm 19. Psalm 19 says, "The heavens declare the glory of God, and the skies proclaim the work of his hands. Day after day, they're pouring forth speech. Night after night, they're revealing knowledge, and yet they're not using words." And it's just a beautiful poetic way of describing how that God uses the universe to bring a message to people around the world without words. And so that is a beautiful psalm to reflect on. And then sometimes people, for good reasons, think about how rich the universe is, how many stars, how many galaxies there are, and think, well, we're not very significant, are we? Does that mean that our lives are without meaning, without purpose, without significance? And the Bible touches on that, right? Because the Bible says in several places that if we think of ourselves as the the core purpose of the universe, but our lives are like grass. It's here today and gone tomorrow. And yet, God gives us significance. I think one of the main messages that I glean from the whole scriptural account is that God has chosen to give us significance through God's love for us and given us even the chance to view creation, to understand it. That's kind of a form of that sort of stewardly dominion that God has given us. And I think science, rightly used, can fit into that duty that God has given us. And so studying things like the universe, studying the natural world is a way of glorifying God. And I think as we learn more and more, it tells us a bit more about God's providence, God's majesty, God's love of beauty, God's power, and God's gracious love for us.
I really agree with what you said. I do think it's counterintuitive, but I've heard people talk about the vast universe and there are more planets, and almost as if that is despairing on us. And yet the psalmist is like, maybe our attitude should be, who am I that you are mindful of me? Maybe there is something in the universe that is supposed to make sure we understand, like you're saying, that our lives are a vapor, that whatever significance we have is that God is mindful of us, not that we are such a big deal just because we're a big deal.
Well, the way I kind of think of it is that the universe is created by God to honor God and to show us the magnificence of God, the glory of God. And God has enabled us and other life on planet Earth to thrive by God's own grace and providence. And that itself, I think, is a signpost that we have a significance, not because of our place in the universe. We learned, a few centuries ago that we're not in the center of the universe. And we learned that our Earth is not in the center of the solar system and our lives don't last very long. But we do have significance because we're able to recognize these things. We're able to perceive God's creation and something about God's majesty through God's creation. And then, of course, as Christians, we rejoice that God has revealed something much more personally aimed for us in the coming of Jesus Christ on planet Earth, that we have a manifestation of God in human flesh right here on this planet, living a human life just like we live, teaching us about the character of God, the personal characteristics of God, demonstrating them, and then taking our sins away through Jesus's death on the cross and through his incredible resurrection, which shows us that there is more than perhaps what our telescopes and microscopes can measure about reality that God knows about and that we are a part of. So I think, nature tells us something about the character of God, which we should not overlook. And then Christ Jesus himself told us, taught us, and modeled for us the very character of God and gave us a way of having that eternal relationship with the same God who's responsible for the universe that we're a part of.
Well, that's a good springboard into my the last thing I want to ask you here, and because yes, it's general revelation and a special revelation, and they're interconnected. They really are. But you said something that really resonated with me when we were going through our cohort together, and you mentioned how there is. Well, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but now there maybe when you first started, you didn't see it as much, but now there's a real growing contingency of Christians in the sciences, or at least once you guys started doing, I think you mentioned like a fellowship through the astronomers, or when y'all would go to conventions, and now you might have dozens of people that come. And I don't know if that is something that's growing or something that has always been there, or what encourages you about Christians, being present in the sciences.
Well, I'm very encouraged because I think there's a growing recognition that science is a tool to help if it's used well, can help humanity understand some of the details of how the natural world works, and hopefully we can use that knowledge to help people and do good things. But science is not a god, and science does not answer all the questions or address all the things that humans care about. And I think there's a growing recognition of that amongst all scientists, and also certainly historians of science, who recognize that this idea that there has to be some kind of a conflict between science and religious faith is really a false notion. Now, I'm also encouraged because I've always found that there are other Christians in science and in my own field of astronomy. And we have fellowship groups and things like that where we get together and encourage one another. Um, and I also work with scientists who are people from other faith traditions or no faith tradition, but we're interested in some of the same questions about the universe. So we have sort of common curiosity that brings us together. That's one of the things I like about science, is that it can actually be a unifying function of curiosity. And also in the more applied sciences, how do we use the science knowledge to help others through education or through service? For Christians, I think science can be seen as a way of really honoring God, and that can be true for almost any kind of science or technology. You have to ask ourselves, sciences, it's more obvious, if you're studying science, it's more obvious that you can use that in a more immediate way to help people who are sick or suffering. If you're studying basic research like astronomy or fundamental physics or fundamental theoretical chemistry or things like that, it's not always obvious the connecting the dots. And yet we believe that all truth is God's truth, and that fundamental knowledge, just as we heard from Psalm 19, that the heavens declare the glory of God, fundamental knowledge can help everyone have a richer sense of God's creation. And also, you need the basic knowledge to feed into the more applied uses of it later on. We should always be thinking as a society and as Christians how best to use this knowledge to uplift people, to serve God. I think of my colleague here I work at the NASA Goddard Space Flight Center, and one of my colleagues takes her vacation time. As a Christian, she goes and has visited at least one orphanage in another part of the world where the children have enough food and clothing, but what they're really interested in is space. And so she tells them what we're learning through astronomy and what we're learning about the stars. And these kids' spirits are so uplifted, and they want to learn more. They want to become astronauts. They want to become scientists. They're given a vision for using their lives in ways that are curiosity driven, and they're excited. So there are different ways of using scientific knowledge, both in practical ways and also in kind of these more spirit lifting ways to serve God. And so I really encourage parents and young people to consider science and engineering and other technical careers as a path of serving God, and it can be a very fruitful one.
Well, that's a great word to end on. Dr. Wiseman, thank you so much. This has been a long time coming. I've been looking forward to it, and this has been a really cool conversation. So we really appreciate you.
Thank you very much, and keep looking up at the night sky whenever you have a chance.